Welcome to Bond Park. I'm Sarah Geidlinger.
And I'm Marshall Ward.
And I'm Marc Santos, and I'm a photographer and photo assistant.
Welcome to Bond Park.
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 We've got big news.
Do we ever? We have a brand new website.
And so many amazing things to check out on it.
Bondpark.com.
What can we find there?
You can listen to our episodes right on the site.
You can check out the Bond Park community blog.
You can find out how you can partner with us.
Oh, and the shopping. We have so much fun merchandise.
I'm going to buy myself the I'm the Marshall Ward tote.
Me too.
Bondpark.com. Check us out. Okay. Mark, ready? I had to crack my neck. I'm like, now I'm fucking ready. Go.
Oh, did you?
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
I know. Carrying gear and holding a camera is not conducive to health. I think I've constantly lived my life in this position.
Yeah, bad knees, bad posture.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah. And I had knee bursitis for a long time from doing baby shoots and kid shoots. Yeah. And then playing on the floor with my kids. So
I hear a lot of photographers have knee problems in the future. They have to get knee replacements.
And I have everything on this side of my body because I think they teach you don't hold your huge heavy camera with one hand, but you do because you're carrying something else, or maybe you're holding your own reflector.
Yeah,
right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
All right. Anyway, Marc Santos, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
We're very excited to talk to you.
Are we?
We are. We are.
This is where you find out I'm incredibly boring.
You are not incredibly boring. You're incredibly exciting. I want to tell you a quick story. So we know you, obviously. Our first ever interview was with Sarah Flyzik, your partner. And of course, me and my kids are constantly poring over your photos. We love, especially your Instagram, because that's our medium for photo intake. And this past month, you had this fireworks series that we just loved.
Oh, yes.
We absolutely loved. So first you're filming it and we get to see Sarah holding it. By the way, I'm glad she survived and I know that her father Les has actually been certified and passed for firework safety.
Yeah,
so it's you were in the right place to do it. And if anyone doesn't know who I'm talking to about Les Flyzik has been our most listened to episode on Bond Park ever. So go back and check that out. He also did a recap with us for our season 2?
Yep, that's right.
Yeah.
Less rules.
Les does rule. Yeah. Vote for Les. But anyway, we were just enamored with this fireworks series. So I just want to start by talking about that specific series and the inspiration, because I think it's part of a childhood revisitation or something that you've been working on, or am I just putting my own thoughts on that?
No, that is actually what it is. I mean, I found myself working on, this is a quick jump ahead, I guess, but because it's a recent thing that I've been doing, but I've started this series that I'm working on called Violence in My Youth. And the series kind of came about, I was just being a photographer, I'm always looking for little things to photograph, and I pull inspo from everything around me. But the images that I create, they're very singular. And I found myself toying with these ideas of bringing up the past and nostalgia, and that's kind of how Violence in My Youth kicked up. So basically the series it's funny, I mean, I'm talking about this, but I'm also going through the motion of figuring out the entirety of the series. But basically, being a 90s child and looking at how kids are growing up now, especially with phones. And I'd heard a stat a couple of years ago that there are less kids who know how to ride bikes now than ever before.
That makes my heart so heavy.
Yeah, and it's kids don't know how people from even just the 90s grew up and just what was regular to them. And looking back at it as a young adult, I'm my youth and a lot of the youth of a lot of my peers, we had violent childhoods indirectly, and violence is an interesting concept, but then when you tie it in with childhood, it's not what you would imagine. I mean, if you look at why are kids buying cap guns, or why is it always a gun, a water gun, a BB gun, and then I pulling inspo from going back to the whole fireworks thing. I mean, in my childhood, you find yourself doing random things on the daily. So, I mean, Roman candle tag was super common, so that's where that particular image came from. So you're just shooting fireworks at each other
Trying
from
not to get hit.
yeah, exactly, just like dodging. It's like just something to shoot at, but it's like it's violent, you know. And I mean, the series itself has a lot of different layers to it that I'm trying to figure out on my own. And I mean, like what creates panic in a child, you know, like those kinds of things. But it may not be anything really to panic about. I mean, like running in tag is like a form of panic in some capacities. Like there is some form of like, I don't want to get caught, right? Like, I don't know. It's like a weird series that I'm working on right now.
In tag specifically, though, there's a couple of things I want to say here, but in tag specifically, there, and you're talking about panic, there's a healing and growth process in there that is, I'm frightened, I want to win, and I'm excited all at the same time.
Yeah, for sure.
But you heal yourself from that by the end of the game, and you all have a good laugh. It's almost like a good workout, or because I know you do a lot of fitness stuff too, or a good workout or a good run or something like that, where you get that elation at the end of it. So you've figured out how to sail through this cycle of emotions in a game of tag, but you don't know you're learning at the time you're doing it. But it's so valuable. You might have been the last generation to grow up in this time where you got to have this kind of violence. Like, I will tell you this one thing here. I was really against having my kids having screens for the longest time. Marshall might laugh at this because we're a real big screen family these days. But for the longest time, I pushed it off as far as I could, as long as I could, until it kind of became what I considered inevitable. And I saw within months a noticeable drop in their motor skills. So,
oh, really?
Threading a needle to sew something, picking something off a table, climbing a tree. There was a shift.
Yeah.
Where those skills started to depreciate when they should have been, like, not depreciate, they started to decline when they should have been advancing and advancing and advancing. And those tiny little things, like just this past summer, showing the girls how to like properly use a lighter, and just like, oh, this is annoying this child's behavior, let's just pull that off, and then you can light the fire this way. And like, these little things that we just knew how to do, they don't have it.
Yeah, I mean, like tag is like a simpler way of putting it, but I'm like, where I grew up, it was called manhunt. Like, why is it called manhunt?
Oh yeah, that puts a whole different.
Yeah, you know, or I'm trying to think, like I have like a list of things in my book that I've written out that I want to explore a little, because the project itself is still in such an explorative phase that I'm trying to find the visual language that I'm trying to go through as I'm going about shooting these images, right?
Yeah.
So there's only it's funny, if you go on Instagram, I'm the only person who's hashtagged violence in my youth, and it's like an ongoing series. And I've had people in like the photo community already ask me about, what is this series you're working on? Because when someone in the photo community sees that there's a series being worked on, they immediately want to know what it's about and where it's going and what the end goal is. And I don't know where it's going. I don't know what the end goal is. I just know that I'm working through it, which is like the fun and the beauty of working on a photo series.
Whenever I'm outside and I see a kid walking home, maybe from school, they'll grab a leaf off a tree, like just pull it right off the tree. It's on the boulevard, right? Mm-hmm. I'm often reminded of my own childhood and how my brother one time watched me pull a leaf off a tree. I put it on the ground and I had a magnifying glass and I burned the leaf.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's like in the series too. Like playing with fire as a kid is like super. Almost every kid that I've ever friend.
And then David saw me burn an ant as well, right?
Yeah.
And David came over and he said, "So what do you think you're doing?" Right? Mm-hmm. And I got a good talking to about why I'm never going to pull a leaf off a tree again, and why I'm never going to burn an insect again. And I never did. Anyways, I'm reminded of it every time I see a kid walking past the house and yanking a leaf off a tree.
The thing about me too is, like, before I found myself being a photographer, I was a skateboarder. I still am a skateboarder, but I mean, the subculture of skateboarding in itself is also very anti-culture, and it's more inclusive now, but you had to kind of like, you were breaking a mold just being in the mold of skateboarding, and just through that act, like there's a lot of rebellion within that culture that is also embedded in me. And I think all these things aid in this particular series that I'm going about right now. So
you guys mentioned a really cool thing there about fire, and it's funny that all three of us have talked about it now. We all played with fire, and we knew we weren't supposed to, but we learned how to do it safely. Well, hopefully most of us, like we're all still sitting here. That's what I'm sort of talking about. But earlier when you were talking about a series, I was really looking towards Marshall, because Marshall's a longtime artist, and series and bodies of work are something that he finds fascinating. So there's something kind of beautiful about talking to Marc on the onset of a first real big series for him, where it's in the journey phase.
For sure.
Yeah.
When I see your, let's say, your your one photo of sparklers. So it's kind of, I think you're down below looking up at sparklers. I think that's how it's done, or maybe above. And there's a hyper realism to that photo, and I'm not talking about just super high end cameras and photography. I'm talking about there's what I think of as super high realism, which you can also find in paintings as well. How is that achieved?
Well, it's funny you mentioned the painting thing, because like before I went into school for photography, I was in a 2-year art program at Sheridan. So I think that is already kind of at a ground level where a lot of my work kind of pulls inspo from, just in terms of like composition or anything like that. And I mean, as a photograph, it is a still, but a lot of the stuff that I create is actually, I'm taking pictures, but I'm also image making. There's a lot of shopping involved with more of the recent work I've been doing. So like sparklers or any of the fireworks, like there's a lot of push and pull between what is reality and isn't reality to achieve those final images. But that's just kind of, I'm not the biggest fan of having to Photoshop stuff yet. At the same time, a lot of my work is so Photoshop heavy. But yeah, it's all just plating, and it is hyper realism, and it is a false narrative, a false truth in some ways. Because like that, in particular, that sparkler image, I photographed each sparkler once, like separately, and then I had to plate it all together. So it's like, it's more work to build the image than it is to shoot the image.
I find it's there's always this kind of mystique to other people's mediums. If Sarah and I had to switch places this weekend, if Sarah had to write my newspaper column, yeah,
Excuse me,
I wouldn't be able to do that either.
No,
So.
no, like I mean, she could write a newspaper column, but if I said and write it just like the way I do, right? That's not really possible, right?
It would sound like, when somebody's making fun of their friend, like, oh, are we doing it this way? Like, it would sound like I'm mimicking you.
In fact, I've heard writers talk and write about the idea that you actually can't mimic another person's writing style. Someone can't go and write a Stephen King book. It's not it's actually not possible. Is what I've heard. So if you put me in charge of like a photo shoot kind of thing, it's impossible for me to achieve what Sarah can achieve. Don't you find that with a medium that you kind of you're an expert at that?
Expert, not an expert.
Well, to the rest of us, you are. You know, what
you've had the education. You're working in the field, so let's say you're an expert in the field compared to us.
You said it. I won't say. I won't say it.
Is it something that can even be explained? Like how if you were to ask me about my writing, I'd say, well, I've written thousands of articles. That's how I got to this place. How do you explain that? Before you're 30 years old, you've managed to achieve that level of photography.
Yeah.
I mean, I think
don't get a big head about it, Mark. But
no. I think that I really like this one quote, and I forgot who it was that said it exactly, but it was in the context of music. And it was Dave Chappelle who had referenced it, but he was just like, he was referencing this other artist, this musician, saying like it took him years to like learn to play like himself. Right? And I think at this point, photography is so reference based, and everything's been done. So to pull inspo from one thing, and then whether it be like the slightest thing is like, can create any kind of level of inspiration, especially for me. So I'm always constantly looking at references in other work. And even though my stuff is mostly still life, I'm still pulling reference from portraiture. I'm still pulling reference from like old film photography or like new, like the thing about photography is before it would happen and you'd see the image. Now it's like, it's just happening with the amount of work coming through. Right. So I'm like constantly pulling inspo. So I mean, like I'm still trying to figure out how I shoot. Like people are like, oh, this feels very Marc Santos, and I'm like, well, this image doesn't feel like something. Yeah, like people can say about anybody's work, but it's like I'm still just trying to figure it out as well, like where my visual language sits for X amount of time might be like how people recognize my work the most. But that's looking at it on like a very low scale, but if you look at it on a grand scale, I mean, I'm sure there are images from 4 or 5 years ago that might still tie in with work that I do now. So I guess just embedded in the artist of like how they, or the writer, like how they write, how they create, how they write. again, pulling inspo from the past, making it new again, and then even referencing yourself from the past can also benefit the future as well, right? Which I find myself doing a lot of.
I love this.
Does that answer your question?
Oh, totally. I love this because while you're saying there's definitely a DNA to what I do, I'm young and I'm like, there's so much more ahead. You're saying it without saying it, I think.
Yeah, I'm never like, I won't shoot that. Like, whatever it is, like, I'm always open to whatever the subject is or whatever the idea is, right?
And you're open to the fact that this might be your work today, but 10 years from now, be a totally different type of thing. You're not going to be just put in this box.
No, I don't want that. Yeah, no, I don't want that at all. I mean, I'm like, in comparison to other people's careers, of the people who I look up to, they weren't in a real strong stride until they were like mid 30s, right? Or like older than I was. Did they find how they shot, like how they photograph things. So I feel like I'm excited for what I'll find myself doing in the future. That's where I find myself just building decks instead in the future, or canoes or something. And
there's nothing wrong with that either, right?
No, it's like not photo based at all.
And again, that's somewhere where Mr. Les Fleisig can help you. So your program in Sheridan, you did the 2-year art program, then you made the switch to photography. Tell us about this journey, and then I want to go into talking about the BIPOC Photo Mentorship Program and the series that's on exhibit in Toronto.
Yes.
So take us through that little journey there. Sorry, it's not little. Take us through that journey of education and where you are now. Yeah.
So, like how I got into photography. Even do you want me to?
Yeah, like first you started in the art program, and you're like, I'm not sure what I'm doing, right?
Well, actually, it was when I was in grade 11. I entered yearbook, and then they needed photographers for the yearbook, and I was like, oh, okay, like I guess I'll like sign up for this. And then there was like a little test where it was like, we need you to go around the school and just document 10 images. And then based off of whoever has the strongest images, those will be the shooters for the year. So then I submitted my 10 images, and they were like, okay, you can be a copywriter. And I was like, sweet. And then obviously through events happening through the high school, there was one like Halloween event. No one wanted to do it because everyone wanted to go do their own Halloween thing. And I was like, screw it, I'll go do the Halloween thing. And I photographed it. And then the teacher, I almost said prof, the teacher was like, yeah, you actually shot more photos than anyone else ever does, and you actually like got portraits of people, and it wasn't just random images of like, it was enough for them to be like, oh, you should probably be the photographer as well. So then from that, I just was photographing every event. And then in the school, I kind of became the only high school like yearbook photographer. So then going to college, it's like, what do I want to do? I want to go do photography. And I didn't get accepted anywhere that I applied. I was like, I had no awareness to a portfolio. My school wasn't an art school.
This is such an important part of your story to tell, though, because there's perseverance in it. So
yeah, like there's also just like, I'm one to be, if I'm not good at something, like that annoys me. You know, like I don't know if it's like a competitive thing within me. I don't know where it comes from, but it's also just like if I'm not good at that, I want to be good at it. And it's not that I don't want to be better than somebody else. It's that I want to be the best at it for myself. Right. So I had applied to Sheridan for the 2-year art program. Also just because I did enjoy art, but I was like there was no arts, like my school wasn't an art school. Right. So I did the 2-year art program. And during that time doing it, I gained a lot of knowledge in just composition. I feel like I thrive well in those type of environments where here's a structure, now go do with this structure what you want to. Because I mean that is what art is in a lot of capacities. Like you have a subject and you want to do something creatively with it, or you want to just documenting something for what it is still artful, right? You're breaking the rules and you're also following the rules at the same time. So then doing that 2-year art program, I had already gotten an awareness of the campus after the 2 years, and I was like, okay, well, I'll just apply to Sheridan out in Oakville. And that was the only school I applied to, and then I got in. And it's funny just because I didn't even do research into the level of quality that the Sheridan program had. It wasn't until I got into it I like realized what I was in. So it was like a luck of the draw type situation of like not doing research and ended up in a good spot anyways.
Can you tell us a bit about A Still of Life, A Still of Death, the exhibition in Toronto?
So that's the title of the one piece that I had in the show that was at Nathan Phillips Square in Toronto. But basically during the pandemic, when there was, more awareness brought to racial injustice and inequalities in certain lines of work and industries, it was heavily brought up that the photo community, particularly in Toronto, is lacking a level of diversity within it. So a prof actually from Sheridan named Heather Morton, and she had a few other peers as well. They basically came together and created the BIPOC Photo Mentorship. I might be ruining the timeline here. I think it was in 2020, but basically they got mentors and mentees. So people who had X amount of experience in the photo industry, whether it was producers or photographers or, even I think just recent graduates who had more awareness to what it's like to navigate the industry. They asked them to come forward and be like, hey, if anyone wants to share knowledge with anyone who's BIPOC, just to help kind of diversify the industry, we want to do this thing to basically further push this, right? And there was a huge response, and I found myself being a mentee to two mentors over the course of 2 years, Steph Martinook and Rachel Wine. Steph is a photographer and Rachel Wine is a photo editor. And basically through the process, I would just come to them whenever there was like certain times, like every other week we'd have a discussion, like Steph and I or Rachel and I, and it'd be a portfolio review, or it'd be like, oh, I got like approached for this job and I don't have much experience doing budgeting for a job this big, or, what is usage? What are deliverables? Like those kinds of questions that like I didn't learn in school, and they're so critical to the process of being a photographer to have a livelihood, right, in this line of work. So the BIPOC Photo Mentorship eventually got big enough that they were able to be part of Contact, the photo festival out in Toronto. And we had a month-long show. It was about a month. It's down now, but it was a month-long show showcasing, I believe, 15, maybe less, maybe more photographers that were all mentees to the program. Yeah. And then we had Michelle Pearson-Clark be the curator for the show. So she chose one of my images, which was A Still of Life, A Still of Death, which you mentioned earlier, Marshall.
Can you tell us about this image and how you created it? It's interesting.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's like I was telling my friends about it. Like, I hope the show is big prints, because my image to some people might be a little bit gross. And then some people, they might be really into it. So I was like, I want my big gross image to be like on Nathan Phillips Square for the biggest it can possibly be. But basically the image, should I describe it? It's just, there's like a crab claw holding a wasp hive. There's a ladybug, there's a wasp, and there's also a butterfly. I'm
looking at it right now.
It's terrible that I'm like, what is in that image again?
I think it's actually kind of beautiful.
So
our daughter Justina has just entered the kitchen to get some
cookies.
Some goodies.
Yeah.
She's making a lot of noise.
So basically the image came about, I mean, just in my own weird head, I'm always looking for
let's let her get to snacks and then we'll get back to the description. That's okay. I told
a handful of berries.
I know, like the grubby mitts right into the bowl of berries. I know. I'm just kidding. Bye. We're going to take a moment to hear from this episode's sponsor.
Ever wondered what happens inside a black hole?
Or what quantum mechanics tells us about reality?
Curious about how the universe began or how it will end?
Feed your curiosity with Conversations at the Perimeter, a science podcast from Perimeter Institute for Theoretical Physics.
On each episode, we chat with a different scientist about the grandest questions in the universe, from the quantum to the cosmos.
Geek out to Conversations at the Perimeter, wherever you get your podcasts.
And now back to the show.
In my own head, going back to the whole pulling inspo from anything, I remember I was out somewhere and I just found like a wasp hive, and in my head I was like, oh, that'd be interesting to photograph. And the wasp hive had already been like abandoned, or I don't know what the proper term is for like a dead wasp hive. And I was talking to my friends, like, that'd be kind of funny to photograph. And my friends didn't even question it, because that's pretty common with me. I'd be like, oh, like water guns, I'm buying this for a photo. Oh, like fireworks, I'm buying this for a photo. So I was like, oh, wasp hive, like, like, can I put this in your car? It's like a small too. It's maybe like the
tiny,
size. Yeah, it's like the size of, it's like slightly bigger than a toonie probably.
Do you want to tell us about the process of this photo? Like, did you construct this, or is
Yes,
this,
it's all in camera. So I had already had the butterfly from another image, and
like you built the sculpture and you're shooting the sculpture?
yeah, it's all pinned together. It's all, so all these like bugs and like the crab, it's all dead already, right? I just thought inherently going back to, I guess it was like an inherent thing of just going back to, you know, still lifes being live or dead, like whatever it is. There's a beauty within working in a dead medium, oddly enough.
Oh, for sure.
And I just, the composition found itself, the staging found itself for me. I was just like, it was an explorative process. And it's funny to think that, you know, in commercial line of work, it's such a, this, we're doing this, we have to check these boxes off. But then when I'm shooting my own stuff, it's very just, it's an explorative process, and just, it finds itself and it works out sometimes. And in this case, it worked out enough that someone like Michelle thought that it'd be good enough to be chosen for the show. And it's the biggest my image has ever been. I think it's like 7 feet tall.
Something special about that. I know Marshall's got some large pieces and has had large pieces over the years. And tell us about that feeling. Both of you. Yeah. I've never done that. So
The large prints is everything. Like when Sarah and I are looking at our work, we're like, is this, like, there's another podcast I listened to with, it was with another photographer named David Brandon-Geeting, and he was saying how him and his friends who are also photographers are like, well, is this image for a screen or is it for a 4 foot, you know, print? And I always like that, because in my head, I'm always like, I want print. You know, I like, yes, people see my work mostly through social media. That's always the case now. But in my head, I want that billboard. I want that solo show. I want people to come specifically to see the work. I don't want people to like scroll. I want people to like sit with my work. Right. And I think that's something like this particular image does lend itself more to that kind of visual appreciation, as I hope most of my work does.
Yeah, scale is a really interesting thing to talk about. You know, Sarah and I went to an exhibition at the Homer Watson Gallery earlier this year.
Samara Tazeen?
Yeah, Samara Tazeen. And she, and the work was beautiful. And for me, it was just the right scale. And I don't think it would have benefited from being any bigger. You know, we're talking like pretty small, you know, and
it's intimate then. It pulls you in.
She actually has training in miniature painting. That's like her classic training is miniatures.
Yeah, that's right. So she probably couldn't even achieve that on a large scale.
Or wouldn't want to.
Yeah.
But you have some, like you've got a giant brass sculpture outside of City Hall. Like that's a huge scale.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, especially... this is interesting.
What are you feeling? Feels?
Just I don't know if I've thought too much about it. You know, like I think inherently we know when work can work best when it's big. You know, and when it should. There's reasons for it to stay small, right?
Yeah,
and like you said, intimate.
Yeah. No, like there's a fun experience seeing your image really big, whether it be just like poster size or like. Oh man, even an 11 by 14 is like, can be considered a big print to some people, right? So 4 by 6, it's like too common. Like I will always want to have my work be printed big, and I always love going, like when the pandemic kicked up, we were like, I guess we're not going to any galleries for a while. Like anytime that I can find myself fitting in the schedule, like going to a gallery or seeing a show or seeing an image like in person rather than a screen, because there's so many little nuances that you get from like the print quality, the paper, like how does the lighting in the room affect the image, like all those things are something like things that Sarah and I are always aware of, especially with Sarah doing her master's now, and she's even more hyper aware into the whole difficulties and pros and cons of
but hers is specifically photography curation, right?
Gallery curation,
gallery
image preservation.
curation,
yes,
yeah.
I'll let her talk about that. But it's like there's like we appreciate seeing people's work in person whenever we can. I mean, we can't always do it, which it's like we never feel good about, but it feels good to see that.
Oh, because you have a lot of friends to support and people in the business and people coming up, and you want to see everything.
Yeah, that too. And it's also just, I mean, I'm trying to be, you know, someone that people recognize in the photo community, and I want to also be someone who recognizes others in the photo community, right? And then also, I mean, that comes from the BIPOC photo mentorship and also my upbringing and all these things. Like, it's just fun.
This conversation is lending to one topic, but I want to backtrack. I'm always backtracking, as
sure.
Marshall knows.
Always tangents.
Yeah, no, I know, and that's where the beauty comes in this show. But I just want to go back to scale of work for a minute. Like, we went to one of those immersive shows, I think the Van Gogh immersive show in Toronto, and like that work was never meant to be bathed on walls in a giant hall, right? That was never the intent of that work. But we get a new meaning and a new life out of all that work from being there. So, you know, does the intent of like, do you need to think about scale when you're shooting it? Or like for myself, as a photographer, I'm always trying to get super sweet focus. That's always my goal, right? That super sweet focus is my exposure on, is everything on, is my focus on. But I also just have such a childhood into my adulthood love of grain. I just love grain. Grain makes me happy. It gives me feelings from my youth. It's a little bit underground. It's a little bit like, you know, I screwed up in the dark room. I'm just starting, just all those kind of feelings. I would love to shoot something purposefully small and have it on a large scale and have it wrong, I guess. So like, just like the Van Gogh exhibit, is it okay that it's a little wrong because it has a new life?
Like, I've had a conversation with friends about it, the Van, and I haven't gone to any of those projection exhibits personally. But it's just like, there's something about an artist being able to dictate. Like, I saw footage of like Richard Avedon going through his show, and he was like, this is printed wrong and this shouldn't look like this. And I'd be curious like what the artist would be thinking for something that's like so big scale projections, and like it's just like an interesting thing to think about. But I mean, like in the end of the day, the image is like the work is massive. It takes up a massive space, and it's a cool thing for people to go into, right? There's like, I think, pros and cons to seeing that work. I mean, I didn't go to that any of those shows, but if I had the chance to go to like a gallery that actually had the paintings, I would go.
For sure.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like a weird thing for me personally. Like, I just haven't gone to any of those shows. I'm totally open to going. I just haven't gone. But the scale is massive. Like, screw it. If I could have my image like
that big,
I'd be like, yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it.
It's possible that Van Gogh and like Picasso, who basically painted on whatever they could get their hands on, right?
What if they hate the show? They're this is too commercial for me, guys.
It might have been their dream
to like
paint large scale.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, and all of a sudden it's, you know.
I really relate to that things being printed wrong feeling as well. As a photographer, you know, you tend to make relationships with families, and then you're invited into their homes to do new shoots and stuff like that, right? So sometimes I go into their homes and I'm like, ooh, that is not how that should have been printed.
Oh, yeah.
It's my work, but I'm just like, ooh, you know, or a screenshot. I'm like, it hurts a little bit. But once it's theirs, it's not mine anymore. You know, it's for them to do what they want with it. And doesn't matter how I think the contrast should be, or the, you know, the size or whatever. I don't know.
When I first saw your partner, Sarah Fleisig's work,
it's the worst.
Yeah, no, it evokes certain feelings in me. I'll make a comparison here. Like, I think collectively, music fans, those who know the song "Comfortably Numb" by Pink Floyd, we all kind of know there's this feeling that kind of comes over you as that song comes in and builds, right?
Yeah.
And that's how I kind of saw Sarah's work, is kind of very dreamy. It kind of can take you away somewhere.
Kind of euphoric, yeah.
Yeah. Do you remember what you first saw in her work? Like when you first saw it, did you notice her color palette kind of, and her compositions, or
color for sure? I mean, it's undeniable that her work is super color heavy. But I also met Sarah when she was working on her thesis in school, or like her year-long project, which is about. It was very explorative, and I mean, yes, there's many layers to it that I don't know, but like what she was going through, just like creatively, I think was like a window for her that helped bring her to like another. It's still informative of the work that she does now, right? Just with soaking film and like in bodily fluids and all those kinds of things. I mean, her work is. Especially in the program, it was very different from everyone else. So it stood out automatically. I mean, the Sheridan photo program is fine art, but it's very commercial. So to see someone doing something so tactile in nature was already like a standout to me. Yeah. Work is fun.
Let's talk about commercial work, right? Because you also mentioned you're a photo assistant. Let's talk about what that journey's been like since school and finding a path, like working out there in the world.
Oh, yeah. So basically graduated 2019, Sheridan, 4-year program. And then I worked like straight out of school. I was doing freelance assisting. I just kind of tried to run right into it. I was like, okay, well, if I've gone to school for this long, I've like devoted this much time and effort and money, I should like try this out, right? So found myself photo assisting as a freelancer straight out of school. And then the pandemic kicked up in March.
Dun.
Yeah. But it was like a weird, I mean, being freelance, you have a job, but you don't have a job. And I mean, looking at everyone else, it's like, oh, it's not just me who isn't working. So it's kind of like, okay, I guess I'll just take time off. Right. I mean, I had just graduated. I should probably have given myself a bit of a break instead of running into work. But yeah, it was just through connections and meeting other people and working with others. It's interesting because you go to school and you pay to learn. And then in this line of work, it's like, especially if you're new, you're getting paid to learn. And then the work starts to perpetuate itself. Like other people hear about you, oh, you're a good photo assistant, you're a good photographer. We want to use you for, these images, or we want to use you for helping out with this job coming up. So it's a gift and a curse. It's a lifestyle shift for sure that people may not be ready for and may never be ready for. But I think for the people who kind of stick in with it, they find the benefits in it for themselves. And I feel like I'm one of those people. So commercial line of work, freelance, photo assisting, and photography.
It can often be a bit of a feast or famine situation.
100% feast or famine.
And it's never when you want it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's like, I could use a break, but I'm not getting one.
Yeah. But I'm also like, if I have a day off, I'm like, oh, I would have worked today if someone needed someone, you know what I mean? Like if someone reached out to me, I'd be like, yeah, it's good, I'll work today. Like, I don't know. So, I'm also kind of a workaholic.
All samesies, as Marshall can attest to.
I found it so refreshing earlier in the conversation that you talked about the possibility that years from now you could find yourself building decks. Like, I mean, that's something that people, speak of in the past. Usually, like, well, I did this and I did that, and then I found I really enjoyed this. You know what I mean? Or this was more where my head and my spirit was at.
Yeah,
right? Yeah. That's really interesting to hear a young person acknowledge that. As much as I'm sure you feel invigorated, it's highly motivating the success you're having now. But or what you're achieving, artistically. But the idea that that may not be what you're doing first and foremost years from now, and that you have your whole life ahead of you, to can you talk a bit about that? Like, I mean,
like, it's being only 26. I work with people who are, I've been doing this for 30 plus years, and I'm like, I was far from being born when you started doing this, and I think that I said that like jokingly, obviously, but I mean, to some people that's a reality. Like they completely switch up career paths. And I mean,
I've done it a few times.
Yeah. No, and like, there's never anything wrong with that. You have to find where there's fulfillment in. And I do find fulfillment in photography and creating images. And I find fulfillment in getting like there's a level of control in photography that I find gratification in, especially when all the cards work and everything falls into place. I mean, that image is still life, is still death. Things just fell into place, and it ended up being in that exhibit, right? So you never know where things will lead. And it's interesting because I've met so many people who were in the photo industry, or like say that they were photographers as kids, but it's the same thing as skateboarding. I mean, people are skateboarders at one point in their life, but they don't do it anymore. And I listened to another podcast, and it's like Alex Honnold was asked, do you feel like you're someone who was really good at something at a very young age, and you're kind of trapped in this lifestyle path that you feel like you can't leave because you were so good at it so early on, you were recognized for it so early on that you don't know anything else? And I remember hearing that and being like, am I someone who might down the line feel like, it's just I got into this so early on that I didn't know anything else, so I couldn't leave this choice in lifestyle. And I was like, I always come back to like, No, I'm happy with what I'm doing. I'm happy meeting new people, working with new people, and like image making is something that I don't think I'll ever give up on, whether I'm, 80 years old or, living out of a van. I will always be looking at how light works and how light interacts and compositionally how things are in the world. I'll always be searching.
Bond Park is made possible with the support of the Kitchener Public Library and the Kitchener-Waterloo Community Foundation.
Our show is produced by Sarah Geidlinger,
And Marshall Ward.
with audio engineering by Sarah Geidlinger.
Bond Park's original music is by Alan Lung. Harry, you still with us? We want to tell you about a fun project that we have. Are you ready?
Yeah.
We have another podcast called An Unscripted Spectacle, Wrestling with Wrestling. Here's Colin Hunter of Kayfabe News to tell you all about it.
Welcome to An Unscripted Spectacle, Wrestling with Wrestling. I'm Colin Hunter from Kayfabe News. Marshall is utterly obsessed with professional wrestling. Sarah is utterly perplexed by professional wrestling. On each episode of An Unscripted Spectacle, Marshall and Sarah talk with a different guest from the world of wrestling. Promoters, referees, journalists, and current and past stars of the Squared Circle to talk deeply about the strange magic of professional wrestling that has enchanted Marshall his whole life. Can they turn Sarah into a fellow connoisseur of professional wrestling? She'll need some convincing.
I find out who Jimmy Corderas is. Who the heck are you?
Oh, well, that's a good question. For those who don't know, I spent the better part of over 2 decades working in WWF/WWE, mostly as a referee inside the ring.
I have the honor of meeting the magnificent LuFisto. I heard that you were described as the first lady of hardcore. I've just recently found out what hardcore is.
Yeah, thanks to Madman Pondo.
When I've learned that I was going to be inducted, it was like, it is now my time to tell the story of women's wrestling. Because so many times I've heard, oh, this is the first time this happens in women's wrestling history. And I'm like, no.
I learned all about the storytelling and writing process from Tom Casiello.
Yeah, I was in soap operas for 14 years. I was at Young and the Restless last. That was from 2009 to 2011. And so I thought, I'll go in for the interview. I'll be honest with them. If I blow it, I blow it. Not the end of the world. And I was there for 6 years. And I rose up the ranks to managing lead writer. And it was the most insane time period of my entire life.
I got a new skincare regime from RJ City. Checking out your hair, and I wish that mine looked like yours. You have beautiful locks.
Thank you. The secret, this isn't a plug, it feels like an endorsement, is aloe vera. I have it here. I put it on my skin. I put it in my hair. I use the gel. I put a couple drops of peppermint in.
I have a plant right there on my
Good.
fridge.
Cut it open, squeeze it out, and put it, honestly, wherever you want. It's good for you.
I find out that Colt Cabana is just famous enough that he can still buy groceries. And Tyson Kidd tells me all about the people's elbow. Who knew?
Basically comes to a complete stop, then brings his leg over the guy like he's going to do a leg drop. But the leg keeps circling past the guy, and then he drops an elbow on the guy.
Oh, and the elbow represents all the people of the fans? He's been voted, he's going to drop this elbow?
Well, he started calling himself the People's Champion, and then that move just became the People's Elbow.
And then there's also, as you know, there's the People's Strudel.
Yeah. I mean, there's the People's Eyebrow. There's a lot of the people. Got a lot of people.
So check out An Unscripted Spectacle, Wrestling with Wrestling. Available anywhere you get your podcasts.